In the fifth moon of 130, a crowd of tens of thousands of starving people walked up the hill of Rhaenys and stormed the Dragonpit with hand tools, where 4 dragons died. A fifth died outside the pit. Thousands of those people died doing it. They won anyway. And here is the part that should stop you. Nobody had breached the walls. No army was inside the city. The gates that opened that night were opened by the men paid to hold them. That is the thing about King's Landing that I think gets missed. Across the entire Dance of the Dragons, the capital changes hands, loses control, and collapses into anarchy repeatedly, and it never once falls to a siege. It is never stormed. The walls do their job perfectly the entire time. So the argument I want to make is this. King's Landing was built to control a kingdom, not to survive the war for it. Every design decision in that city optimizes for peacetime extraction, for sitting in one place and governing a continent. Almost none of them optimize for the city, surviving a fight over who gets to sit there. And when the realm turns on itself, every single feature that made it a good capital becomes a reason it cannot hold. I want to walk through 4 of those features. Let's start with the most basic one, which is that the city cannot feed itself. King's Landing has a population of somewhere around 500,000. Martin has said it's larger than medieval London or Paris, smaller than Constantinople or ancient Rome. So we're talking about one of the largest concentrations of people on the continent, sitting in one place. Now, why is it in that place? Because that's where Aegon landed. 3 hills, a defensible harbor, the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, the symbolic site of the conquest. Every one of those is a reason about control and legitimacy. Not one of them is about food. And the city didn't grow carefully. It went up fast. Inside the first century of Targaryen rule, and the expansion outran any organized planning entirely. That's where Fleabottom comes from. It isn't a designed district. It's what accumulated in the gaps, while the city sprawled faster than anyone was managing it. So the food comes from elsewhere. It comes up the Rose Road from the Reach. It comes down the King's Road and the Rosby Road. And it comes through the harbor, which is the principal port in the 7 Kingdoms. Here's how you know that dependency is structural rather than incidental. Look at a completely different war generations later. During the War of the 5 Kings, with the Rose Road cut and the Riverlands in flames, the capital ends up supplied mainly by Rosby and Stokeworth, 2 relatively small holdings that happen to be nearby and untouched. And even then there are shortages, and most of what does arrive gets allocated to the Red Keep and the garrison first. Different war, different century, same structure. The capital's stomach depends on roads and sea lanes that the capital does not control, which means something quite specific. Any civil war that touches the Reach, or the Riverlands, or the Rose Road, or the Gullet, is automatically a war on the city's food supply, whether anyone intends that or not. You cannot fight over Westeros without cutting King's Landing's arteries, because its arteries run through everywhere people are fighting. And I should flag something here, because if you're watching the show, this will look different. House of the Dragon puts enormous weight on the Velaryon blockade of the Gullet as the cause of the famine, with Mysaria's agents stirring resentment on top of it. In Fire and Blood, the blockade is real, and it does strain the city, but the food crisis and the riots that actually break the capital happen later under Rhaenyra's own rule for reasons I'll get to. The show compresses it. I'm using the book version, and I'll say so again when it matters. So that's crack 1, a city that eats what other people grow, in a war that burns the places they grow it. Here's crack 2, and it's the one I find genuinely alarming once you look at the numbers. The garrison is a police force, not a defense. The city watch of King's Landing is 2,000 men. The population is about 500,000. That's roughly 1 watchman for every 250 people. For ordinary policing, that's fine. That's a force designed to break up tavern fights, patrol markets, walk the alleys in pairs, and hold 7 gates on a normal Tuesday. It works, and it worked for a century and a half. It is not a force that can hold a city against its own inhabitants. It was never built to be. 2,000 men cannot physically contain 500,000 people who have collectively decided to do something. The arithmetic simply does not permit it, and it doesn't matter how well trained they are, which in the case of the Gold Cloaks is not especially. And we know the system had already failed once, without any war at all. In 59 AC, during the Winter Plague they called the Shivers, so many of the City Watch died that everything outside the Red Keep collapsed into lawlessness and looting. That's not a war. That's just illness reducing the head count. The security of King's Landing is thin, enough that a bad winter can break it. Now add the dance to that. Because during the dance, the watch isn't just thin, it's split. The officers of the City Watch were loyal to Alicent Hightower and the Greens. The rank and file supported their former commander, Daemon Targaryen, who was one of the Blacks. So the institution responsible for holding the capital was factionally divided from top to bottom before the crisis even arrived. The men on the gates and the men giving them orders were on opposite sides of the war. Watch what that produces when the city finally goes up. Sir Luther Largent and 500 gold cloaks arrive at Cobbler Square and are killed there. That's a quarter of the entire watch gone in one engagement against civilians. The Rivergate garrison, the Mudfoots, don't fight the mob. They join a hedge knight called Perkin the Flea and fly his pretender's banner above their own gate. The Gate of the Gods garrison is overwhelmed. The King's Gate defenders run. The Lion Gate defenders join the mob outright. 4 of the 7 gates, and none of them were forced. And when Rhaenyra finally flees the city, she leaves with an escort of 20 gold cloaks. Half of them desert her on the Rosby Road. The rest stop at Duskendale and don't get back on the ship. So here's the summary of King's Landing's defense during the dance. It was never breached, because it never had to be. It was open from the inside every single time. Which brings me to the third feature, and this is the one that's genuinely unique to this city. The dragons live inside the walls. By 130 AC, it had become an actual custom that at least one dragon rider should reside in the dragon pit so that if the city needed defending, something could rise. That's not incidental. The dragons were formerly the garrison of last resort. The plan for defending the capital was, we have dragons here. And when Rhaenyra held the city, the pit housed at least 8 named dragons at various points. Caraxes, Vermithor, Silverwing, Sheepstealer, all of which eventually flew off to fight elsewhere, plus Shrykos, Morgul, Tyraxes, and Dreamfire. Now think about what a dragon actually does to a city's strategic position, and the answer is that it does 2 contradictory things at once. It makes the city the most valuable target in the war. If your dragons are in King's Landing, then holding King's Landing is how you hold dragons, which means every faction has to come for it. The city is not incidentally involved. It is the objective, and it makes the city more frightening to live in, not less, because the small folk have seen what dragons do. Tumbleton had just happened. The Greens had taken a town and burned people in it, and their army was moving toward the capital. So when the population of King's Landing looks up at the dragon pit, they are not looking at their protection. They are looking at the reason the fire is coming. That's what the shepherd understood. He stood in Cobbler Square and preached that dragons were demons, the spawn of godless Valyria, the doom of men. He told the crowd that when Aegon's dragons arrived, everyone would burn, and that prayers wouldn't stop it. And so, the only way the city could be saved was to kill the dragons in the pit. That is a horrifying argument. It is also, from where those people were standing, not obviously wrong. And then the mob does it. Tens of thousands of them go up the hill. The 4 dragons inside are chained and cannot fly. And they fight in an enclosed stone space and kill an enormous number of people. Thousands of small folk die. Syrax dies outside after Joffrey Velaryon takes her, without permission, trying to reach the pit, and is thrown. 5 dragons in one night killed by a starving population with hand tools. The ultimate weapon in the world could not defend the city, because the threat came from inside the walls, and you cannot use a dragon on a street you are standing on. Which brings me to the last piece, and this one explains why the crowd was there at all. Whoever holds the city has to squeeze it. Here is what I think is the most damning sequence in the whole story, and it's easy to miss because it happens quietly. When Rhaenyra took King's Landing in early 130, the city welcomed her. Genuinely. The people didn't love Aegon or Aemond, and the arrival of the queen looked like an improvement. She started with public goodwill, and then she had to pay for a war. Her master of coin, Bartimos Celtigar, raised taxes. She ordered executions. And within months, the realm's delight was being called, in the streets, King Maegor with Teats, named after the most hated monarch in the dynasty's history. By the same city that had cheered her arrival, the Dragon Pit became an execution ground. Traitors, rebels, and murderers were beheaded there. And for the price of 3 pennies, the public could come and watch and see the bodies fed to the queen's dragons. Public death with an entry fee. I want to be careful about the moralizing here. Because Rhaenyra was fighting a war, and wars cost money, and Aegon's regime was not gentler. This isn't an argument that she was uniquely cruel. It's an argument about position. Whoever sits in that city has to fund a continental war, and the thing sitting underneath them is the largest concentrated population in Westeros. So the money comes from there. It has to. There is nowhere else it can come from at that speed. Which means the capital's own function, extraction, is pointed at the capital's own people the moment the war starts. She held the city for half a year, and then Helaena, who had been a prisoner in the Red Keep since the city fell, went out a window of Maegor's holdfast onto the spikes below. She was 21. The city was immediately told she had been murdered on Rhaenyra's orders by Sir Luther Largent, who was demonstrably at the City Watch barracks at the time. Munkin says the shepherd started that rumor. Mushroom says it was Larys Strong. The sources genuinely disagree, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. What matters is that a hungry, frightened, overtaxed city believed it instantly because it fit everything they already felt. That night, the city rose. Mobs killed and plundered across the districts. They hacked the Rivergate to pieces, and the following day the shepherds sent them up the hill. After Rhaenyra fled, King's Landing was governed for a period by a preacher standing in the ruins of the Dragonpit and two rival boy kings, Trystane Truefire, a hedge knight squire, and Gaemon Palehair, the son of a whore. The maesters call it the Moon of the Three Kings. It lasted longer than a month. That's the capital of the Seven Kingdoms. Now let me put the strongest case against all this. The objection runs in three parts. First, the city survived. It's still standing, still the capital, and it stays the capital for another century and a half. Second, the walls were never breached by an enemy army. By the ordinary test of a fortified city, King's Landing passed. And third, none of this is unique. Every large medieval city imports its food, polices thinly, overcrowds, and has bread riots. Calling this city specially fragile is unfair. The third point is the strongest, and it's substantially right. So let me take the first two quickly, and then deal with it properly. On survival, it depends what you're measuring. The masonry survived. The government did not. The city changed hands, or lost functional control, at least 3 times in about 18 months, and spent part of that period being ruled by a preacher and 2 boys. If your test for a city surviving is that the buildings are still there afterwards, almost nothing fails that test. That's not what anyone means by a capital surviving a war. On the walls, that's the argument, not a refutation. The walls were never breached because they never needed to be. A fortification, whose only recorded failure mode is its own garrison opening it, has not been proven strong. It's been proven irrelevant to the actual threat, which leaves the real objection. Every city has these problems. And yes, import dependency and thin policing and bread riots are ordinary, but King's Landing stacks 3 things on top that ordinary cities do not have. It is the single object of the entire war, so every faction must come for it specifically. Its defensive asset is a group of animals housed inside its own walls that cannot be deployed against its own population. And its ruler has to fund a continental war by taxing the people sitting directly underneath those animals. Ordinary cities have bread riots. This one has bread riots with 5 dragons in the middle of them, and the riot wins. So where does that leave the question? King's Landing is not a badly built city. Its walls held, its harbor worked. It governed a continent successfully for 300 years, which is a genuinely extraordinary record for anything humans have built. But it was built for one job, and that job was control. Sit here, collect from everywhere, command in every direction, and that design is superb right up until the moment the realm it governs turns on itself. Because at that point, every property that made it an excellent capital becomes a liability. Its centrality makes it the target. Its size makes it hungry. Its wealth makes it the thing worth taxing. Its dragons make it a prize and a terror at the same time. Aegon built a throne to rule the 7 kingdoms from, and then he built a city around the throne. What he never built was a city that could survive. People fighting over the chair in the middle of it,